more news for the Montreal Canadiens and free agents. We talked yesterday about how Marc Bergevin had a few things to say regarding things like Domi and his contract, and we talked about Pominville and how he's not really in the plans, and Markov and how there was a big off no, and the whole Sebastian Aho offer sheet thing. There was a lot of cool news, and overall, La Presse recently came out with another article talking about the Habs and Jake Gardiner. The article reads, Jake Gardiner a refusé... Okay, no, let's not do that in French. Jake Gardiner refused a $15.75 million contract from Montreal. This is a very, very interesting thing here. Let's just go over the article translated into English via Google Translate. Marc Bergevin says no. Jake Gardiner was not going to be a Canadian. And instead, he goes over to the Carolina Hurricanes, $16 million for 4 years. It's actually really interesting to note that the Montreal Canadiens offer was actually much higher than what the Carolina Hurricanes got Gardiner for. Let's take a look at it over here. I made calls. A contact in the NHL detailed me both offers, that of the Canadiens and that of the Hurricanes. So this was the proposed contract that Montreal sent out to Jake Gardiner. $15.75 million for 3 years. An average of $5.25 million a season. The Carolina Hurricanes, $16.2 million for 4 years, an average of $405 million a year. Jake Gardiner took an AAV of $1 million less for a contract that was 1 year longer. Now, it's actually kind of interesting. There are many ideas as to why Gardiner would not want to come to Montreal, the biggest one being it's Montreal. Don't get me wrong, nothing is wrong with Montreal, but for a guy that was under the media speculation and microscope, like Gardiner was in Toronto, you could definitely understand that a guy who's like that would not want to go to another big town city like Montreal, which has an equally passionate fan base as that of Toronto. So going over to Carolina, where the media is a bit lighter, the fans aren't as crazy. I mean, they've got some crazy fans over there, but in just sheer volume, guys like Montreal, Toronto, Vancouver, they have much higher populations of fans, I guess. The passion is still the same, but you can definitely see the negativity that could come from one's mental state being in an environment like Toronto or Montreal for so long. That's why Gardiner went over to Carolina. The money was less in terms of the yearly value, but he settled there anyway. Now, I could just end the video there, say, hey, this is the news, Gardiner denied Montreal, but this article from La Presse really goes in depth as to the different reasons why it would be advantageous to go with Montreal in comparison to Carolina for the specific contract that was handed out, and why Gardiner would ultimately choose the Hurricanes. The big reason that I gave was, the media, but let's read the article here. Raleigh has its charms. Pedalo can be done at Pullen Park. This fall, the Art Museum will present an exhibition on Frida Kahlo. The dinosaur models at the Museum of Natural Sciences are impressive. But is that worth a loss of $1.2 million a year? No, it is not. What about the tax rate? Yes, there's a significant difference between the maximum tax rate in North Carolina and Quebec, 10 percentage points. But the offer for the Canadiens still remained more advantageous. What about playing time? See, this is what I mean. This article really goes in depth. I love it. In Montreal, Jake Gardiner would have played in the top 4, to the left of Shea Weber or Jeff Petrie. In Carolina, he'll have similar responsibilities with opportunities in numerical superiority. Then it talks about the quality of the team. The Hurricanes had more points, but the potential of both of these teams is similar. But Jake Gardiner actually goes in detail with some of the journalists over there for the Carolina Hurricanes as to why he ultimately chose Carolina. Check out this quote right here. Several teams wanted 1 or 2 year agreements. I did not want to relive that again. With the Hurricanes, it's a good opportunity with a very good team. And yeah, that makes sense. 5 years. It's long-term, and it's in a market that is not a great Canadian market. Say what you want about Carolina, but it's no Toronto, it's no Montreal. And that in itself is also mentioned towards the end of the article, that it is probably a big factor in this whole decision. But either way, the bottom line is Jake Gardiner, he's out. The Habs asked, and Gardiner said no. And instead, he's in a different team now. It's so weird, man. The Hurricanes just going out there, taking away Aho from the Habs in their offer sheet, taking away Gardiner from his UFA opportunity. The Hurricanes are the anti-Montreal at this point. It's so weird to look at. But overall, that's business. Hockey is like that. And it makes sense. It's just that for Habs fans, if you are looking for a big splash in free agency, it doesn't necessarily look like that's going to happen anytime soon. $6 million in cap space. Aho went back to the Hurricanes, and Duchesne went to Nashville. Gardiner went to Carolina. It took 60-something days, but he went to Carolina, and Panarin went to New York. So, well. You know what? I don't think I really hit the point home. I want to talk a little bit more about Gardiner and his time in Toronto, and why that could be traumatic. It's traumatic, people. It's traumatic. You mess up once in a Game 7 against Boston, and all of a sudden you're getting death threats on Instagram endlessly. Now, I'm not going to pretend like all the stuff that Jake Gardiner negatively experienced is a representation of the entire fan base of Toronto, and therefore an entire representation of big Canadian market fan bases. But I will say that hockey fans are crazy. We're all crazy. Hockey media is crazy, especially in this country. So for Jake Gardiner to not come out and outright say it, but for all of us to speculate that Jake Gardiner would come to the conclusion that he wouldn't want to play for another Canadian market because it would be too hectic, it makes so much sense, man. Like, you can't dispute that. Sure, Gardiner had his fans, but I think the majority of Leafs fans were so on the fence with Gardiner. When he makes a good play, when he scores a goal, he does whatever. He's like heralded as a saint, but once he makes that one mistake, or those two mistakes, or those three mistakes in the most important game of the year, that's when the lion comes out of his den. That's when the true spirit and deeply harbored feelings of hockey fans come to show, and it's so, so weird. I'll tell you a little story. I'll tell you a little story for sure. Yeah, we did the same thing here in Vancouver with Roberto Luongo. We were the most bipolar fan base when it comes to our goalie, that it still stings thinking about it. And Gardiner is pretty much the same way. I'm not going to say that they're the same caliber of players, like Roberto Luongo could probably make the Hall of Fame. Gardiner, I don't think he's on that caliber, right? But like, seriously, even when things happen against these other players, Elias Pettersson and the Vancouver Canucks, hey, we targeted Matheson, and we targeted Jesperi Kotkaniemi on Instagram because they did something to our golden boy. Maxime Comtois was a guy who received whole levels of hate because of something that the coach ultimately decided at the World Juniors. This country is crazy about hockey, and the media is no different, which is why going to a place like Carolina, where you've got some passionate fans, but a much lesser amount of them, makes sense for a guy like Gardiner. Gardiner's going to get paid. He's going to get the money. Sure, everything else was better in Montreal if you lay it down on paper. The money, the term, the playing time, you could argue. But your mental health is very, very important, and we should all do our best to contribute to what makes that more positive. Now, is it our responsibility as fans to say, okay, well, I'm not just going to post rant videos about Gardiner anymore? Yeah, okay, yeah, you could probably stop doing that. It's not appropriate. But you're not going to stop everybody from doing that, which is why control over the Toronto media is so hard. You can't really do that. And Montreal is kind of in the same boat too, but just in French. I'm going to get hate for that, but you get what I mean, right? You understand the point I'm trying to make here, right? Right? Sure, I'm a secondary Habs fan, and I would have loved to see Gardiner here instead of Ben Sherratt. Not to say that Sherratt is bad or anything, it's just that Gardiner is literally better. But I can understand where he's coming from. I'm not going to hate on Gardiner for that. I'm not going to hate on Gardiner for any of the things that he did. I have a whole bunch of friends who do hate him on for everything that he did in Game 7. But, like, that's life, man. Man, I didn't really think I'd go in this direction with this commentary, but that's what happens when I have a little thought saying, hey, I need to talk about this more. I need to, hit my point home because I didn't make the point I wanted to make. Gardiner denied the Habs, and now he's in Carolina. Hope you enjoyed this video. Social cyanide, and bye.